So, what happened in November 1970?
Well, we had the IOT biennial conference in Manila, and while I was there, news broke out via social media that something was happening in Zimbabwe, and that something was that the military takeover or a coup was underway in the country. And I remember I was with Sheila Katzman, Jola from the Philippines, and a few other IOT members, and I was just looking on Twitter and on Facebook, and all these stories were coming out that military tanks had surrounded the capital, and people didn't know what was happening. And then when we started following and receiving information, we found out that Mugabe was under pressure. Robert Mugabe, our president in Zimbabwe, was under pressure to step down. And for me, that was something that I never thought would happen in our lifetime, because we have been under this dictatorship for a long time, for 37 years, or since 1980 when we had our independence. So it felt unreal. And for me, it also felt weird because I'd spent the last 17 years reporting about Zimbabwe, reporting about the situation in my country, especially between the period of 2001 and 2010, where we were reporting on via satellite TV. We set up a radio station in Zimbabwe, in London, broadcasting to Zimbabwe, and we were reporting about the human rights abuses, we were reporting about the economic crisis, and on a daily basis. And now, fast forward to 2017, this man who has been part of our existence, who has been part of our life, was just about to be removed, and I wasn't able to report about that or even have any access in terms of finding out what was happening. So it then happened that Mugabe was removed, and the scenes from Zimbabwe, just listening to people via social media, because people took to social media to vent, to express their feelings about this enormous thing that was happening in our country, because many people never thought it would ever happen. And what was also surprising was that the military propped up Mugabe all these years, and even the person who took over, President Emerson Mnangagwa, was one of Mugabe's right-hand men. But surprisingly, when people converged, when people took to the streets, they were actually working together with the military to remove this man, and that was quite surprising and shocking to see. Although to some extent, the way that things happened in the end, some, especially those who are in the pro-democracy movement, say could have been handled differently, because there was a coup in Zimbabwe.
And you were not there. How did you feel about not being there? Or not being in your place in London?
It was difficult to take. I was very emotional. Even some of my colleagues in Iowa witnessed these kind of mixed emotions that I had. I was crying most of the time because on the one hand I was very excited, and because of this had never happened. It was very dramatic, and the way it was done, and also to see thousands of ordinary people taking to the streets of all the different races, whites, Indians, blacks, and also the army, working with the people, because for many years the army had brutalized the population of Zimbabwe. But this time they were taking pictures which were being posted on Twitter, on Facebook. And for me, not being there was a bit like, I would have loved to have been part of that as a Zimbabwean, and also as a journalist, to be able to cover that event. But I was able to still take part in my little way by tweeting and sharing various reports on social media.
Where were you in your heart? Were you in Manila or were you in Zimbabwe?
I was definitely in Zimbabwe. I was definitely in Zimbabwe. I couldn't even sleep. you know, because things were changing so fast. And as I said, we have never experienced that kind of an event. And so one didn't want to be caught napping in case something changed, and things were just changing like so fast. So I was in my heart, I was in Zimbabwe, but obviously physically I was in the Philippines.
But in the Philippines, we also had elections.
Yes.
What kind of elections was that, and what happened?
I was actually laughing that, on the one hand, in Zimbabwe, there was a process of removing the president of Zimbabwe, who has been our president for forever. And then on the other hand, here was in the Philippines contesting for this position to be president of, one of the oldest media organizations for women in radio and TV, for this position of president. And it just so happened that I was elected president around the time that Mugabe was being removed. So, so that was quite interesting.
How do you think the evaluation of the political situation in Zimbabwe will develop, and what will be your part in it?
I'm not sure what my part will be in. And also, Zimbabwe is a very difficult country to read because anything can happen. Like right now, we have this new establishment. They're calling it the new dispensation. But it's still the same ruling party that Mugabe was leader of, that Mugabe headed. And it's the military that many people expected the military to go back to the barracks after they helped to remove Mugabe from power. But they just retired themselves, like the army general retired, and the spokesperson of the coup, who was also a military chef, he also retired from the army. And now the army general, former army general, is now the vice president. And the person who announced the coup on national TV is now the Minister of Finance. So the military has just moved from the barracks and now it's in government. And that is a difficult position that Zimbabweans find themselves in. And so we wait to see what will happen. And also to make issues more difficult is that this is an election year. And we just recently lost one of our main opposition leaders, who was Mugabe's biggest challenger or competition. And so we have this vibrant young opposition leader who's also come up. So Zimbabweans are going through a lot of changes. And so we don't know what the future is going to hold because of these various changes. And we just hope that peace will prevail to some extent in the next few months.
How has these events have changed your life?
Well, when I returned to London, I couldn't wait to return to London, even though I was happy with what we had achieved as IOWAT in the Philippines.
When you returned to Zimbabwe?
When I returned to London, because I have spent the last 17 years in the diaspora, mainly in the United Kingdom, and then also I spent some years in America, and then also a stint in South Africa, all working on reporting in Zimbabwe from exile. I was banned by the Mugabe government in 2001 because a group of us, about 6 of us, set up Zimbabwe's first privately owned radio station, and we were broadcasting on shortwave from London to Zimbabwe. So the radio station was called SW Radio Africa, and basically we were reporting news and current affairs programs on the political and economic crisis in Zimbabwe. So fast forward to 2017, I just felt that we have this change that had happened. And so when I returned to London from the Philippines, I thought it will be interesting for me if I went back to Zimbabwe. This person, this man, this system that had banned us from returning was no longer there. So let's see to what extent that there was real change in Zimbabwe. So I decided to go to Zimbabwe after 17 years in exile to test the waters. So I went end of December and I was there for a couple of weeks, and it was quite interesting in the sense that when I left Zimbabwe in 2000, I had actually left to go to study in the UK, and I left with a Zimbabwean passport. But now, when I was returning to Zimbabwe, I had a British passport because I had been banned and I couldn't apply for a Zimbabwean passport during this period, and so it was difficult for me arriving at the airport with a British passport and applying for a visa to enter my own country. And in fact, the immigration officer, when I gave him my passport, he saw my name and he said, "Oh, welcome back, Violet." I didn't even think that some people would know, because remember, I'd been away from this whole system for 17 years. Although we were reporting about the situation in Zimbabwe, I had never really understood or known to what extent people were receiving our broadcasts. So it was quite interesting that quite a lot of people had, and when they found out like my name or my voice, they recognized me. So even the immigration officer said, "Oh, welcome back, Violet." And then he said something interesting that I just wanted to let you know that if you do any journalism work, you'll be arrested unless if you get accreditation. So he gave me a form that I have to go to take to the Media Commission and get accreditation. But
okay, we'll stop there.